My name is Gillian Jones. I'm Head of Travel, Tourism and Hospitality at Condatis. So I do have a very specific lens on the travel and hospitality market. However, I'm the old lady of Condatis these days. I've just done 5 years, so I have worked across a number of different engagements with a number of different customers, some of whom I see on the call today. So nice to see everybody. So I've really been doing identity across a range of verticals for quite a while. So hopefully today we'll be able to kind of bring some of that expertise and experience to make it pertinent to the current use cases that you're looking to solve for. Matt, I'll hand over to you to say hi.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. Matt Fernandes, Lead Solution Architect with a focus on internal identity. So all things Entra governance, how we get people from places, push, pull, what do they get access to, all the fun stuff. And some of the, yeah. And on to John.
Yeah, and on to John.
Hi, everyone. Thanks ever so much. Yeah, John Burnett. I'm an Entra Global Black Belt here at Microsoft. So really happy to be alongside Gillian and Matt for today's session.
Perfect. So just by way of further introduction, I just wanted to give a quick overview about Condatis, and if you're not familiar with the organisation, a little bit about who we are and what we do. So you may be able to tell from my accent, we are based in Edinburgh in Scotland. We are currently over 40, coming up to about 50, I think, identity experts, and we are all things Entra. So our relationship with Microsoft is extremely important. John, myself, others within the organization, we spend a lot of time talking with one another and making sure that we understand what the products do, how they work, and how we can best implement them for our customers. We're one of the go-to-market partners for Entra, and especially across Entra Suite. So we are really, really doubling down on our expertise and our skill set across Entra Suite, making sure that when we come into these complex engagements with our customers around identity, we have expertise and understanding across all the different component parts, meaning that we can stitch together user journeys and tooling that is going to really be driven by business outcomes. So we're very, very close to our team at Microsoft, and we're really grateful to be on this call today, because I think that when we all come together and work as one, it really provides basically the best experience and the best end result for our customers, which is what we are all after. So today we're going to be diving into a lot more about identity governance, and then how that can be one of the core building blocks to a really strong identity strategy. But what I wanted to do is, just as we're coming to the end of the year, kind of reflect a little bit on some of the key trends that we're seeing. Now, some of this will be very familiar to a number of you, and you'll probably already be all over it. But I think it's been really, really interesting to see the lens really switching to identity being basically the open door, right? So really, really prioritizing identity as part of your security strategy. And this is only being extrapolated by AI. It's only being emphasized by AI and the rate of change that we're seeing. So at the minute, we're seeing approximately a ratio of 40 non-human identities for every human identity. And that's an awful lot to manage. We'll dive into why with identity governance as a starting point, but ultimately what we're seeing here is, if you know who's in your estate, you know who is engaging with you, you can then extrapolate that out and be really, really in the position to manage that sort of expansion. Post-COVID, we are all very digital first. We're still, a lot of us, working at home a lot of the time, and we're really making sure that we are prioritizing our digital capabilities around this, but that therefore requires more management of our workforce, of how we are managing our tooling. It's a bigger cyber risk landscape. We want to make sure that we are covering all of our bases as we grow, and making sure that we've got all these different user groups catered for. And again, all of this builds up to a resilient strategy that we're looking to expand upon. So what does this all really roll up into? Well, it rolls up into zero trust. And I know that, John, you're going to dive into this a little bit more in terms of how Microsoft are dealing with it, and then we'll pick up about how that can be implemented. But what I suppose we're looking to do is verify explicitly, use least privilege, assume breach, but ultimately not make things harder for organizations. We want to be really focused on the business outcomes. We want to be really, really focused on the different user groups and how it impacts their day-to-day basis, and then use the tooling at our disposal to really drive a zero trust position, so that everybody comes out at the end of this as happy customers, your CISOs in good space, your CIOs, and then again, your users, the people that you engage with, your employees. That is the end goal here, and ultimately we're working really, really hard with our customers to ensure that we're delivering this. We can't do it though without Microsoft, and with the power and the platform and the capabilities that are provided by Microsoft. So with that, John, over to you, and perhaps you can take us through kind of your slides and your position, and then yeah, we can dive into some real world examples, and Matt will tell us how we implement this.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Gillian, and thank you ever so much for everyone for joining this session. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited by Condatis to be able to join this session, and for Microsoft to be able to sort of like work together with Condatis, like Gillian was explaining earlier on, and just sort of like going through, so how can we help accelerate your journey towards zero trust, and what is it that Microsoft are doing around that one? 2024, we saw that identities had overtaken endpoints as the new attack vector into organizations. And I think during 2025, we all know the stories around everything that we've seen in the news around how, social engineering in particular has been sort of like targeted for organizations such as Spider to targeting people and to try and logging into organizations rather than hacking into organizations and leveraging the identities that they have. So I think identity is really going higher and higher up the organizational priority list. And in particular in 2025, my phone has been sort of like ringing off the hook with people trying to find out ways, how do we mitigate the identity risks within their organization. So it's great to be able to be here today to sort of like have a look at what we can do in order to be able to support you. Every year, Microsoft releases the Digital Defense Report, and sort of like the top 10 key takeaways from sort of like this year's report, which came out sort of like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And there's a number on here that are focused around identity. So first of all, phishing-resistant MFA is the gold standard for security. You've got to make sure that sort of like having sort of like multi-factor authentication, in particular that phishing resistant multi-factor authentication, is something that your organization has pushed out. And so, that in itself will sort of like start mitigating over 90% of potential breaches that we've seen within organization. Second thing, attackers are targeting identities that enable access to data. They're really sort of like focused on those identities that are going to sort of like find access to data resources within your organization, and sort of like trying to work out what those identities are. So they're working much harder to try and determine those identities. And lastly, we got their workload identities are really under threat. So Gillian mentioned sort of like the fact that we've sort of like got was it 40 times as many sort of like identities to sort of like human identities, and with the agentic future that we've got coming up, we're just going to see that increase in the coming years. So we need to make sure that with our human identities and also our digital identities, that we're in a position to be able to ensure that we give those least privilege and that they've only got access to the resources that they should have access through to. So what we're looking at here is just that we've put together a suite of technologies, which we'll have a look at in a moment, which allow organizations and help organizations sort of like establish those zero trust controls that Gillian was talking about inside your organization. How do you make sure that you've got the secure access for your employees, no matter where they're working, whether they're in a coffee shop, whether they're working from home, whether they're in one of your offices, from various different locations, and that they only have access to the resources that they should have access at the time that they should do. So those sort of like 4 pillars that Gillian was talking about before in Zero Trust. How do we make sure that we can simply and sort of like economically allow sort of like access to the resources and sort of like following those philosophies? We also want to make sure that your customers and your partners, that you can provide the security and access through to those as well. And it doesn't matter where your resources are. It doesn't matter whether it's in AWS, GCP, your own data center, whether it's with Azure, third-party data center, no matter where those resources are, how do we make sure that those zero trust controls are in place there? So let's have a look at the zero trust pillars that we've got within there. I'm sorry about the rendering if it's not presenting well to you there on the right side. Within the Microsoft zero trust pillars, we've got sort of like the 6. These are what we generally said is that the identity is the new perimeter. It used to be that we had the hard firewall exterior and then sort of like soft in the middle. And what we realized is, Gillian was describing before, with sort of like the new way of working, identity is in sort of like the middle of that. But it needs to get access to endpoints, needs to get access to data, network resources, security operations, and your infrastructure. And how do we make sure that those identities through those endpoints only have access to the resources that they're implicitly given? So within sort of like the Microsoft Zero Trust framework, these are the 6 pillars that it is that we've been focusing on, and you as an organizations can take those and determine how do you put your security policies in place to each one of those pillars to make sure that you've got your Zero Trust security in place. But now what we've got to have a look at is that we've got to have a look at sort of like with agents and AI, how we've got to add a new pillar into those ones. And so through our Zero Trust framework, we're actually introducing a new agents and AI pillar within that, where you can then sort of have a look at your security controls. And one of the things that I would say, what I say to everyone is that you may or may not sort of have your a plan around AI or agentic sort of like security in place at the moment. The key thing that I do say is that you go back into your organizations, you start talking about it, you start working out what it is that you need to do, and you start understanding the plans. When I talk to organizations, they often tell me, we don't have any agents running within our organization at the moment. They quickly have a look through sort of like their Entra portal, and you can do that. Just sort of like see what's going on, and often they find that they might have sort of like 50, 100, 150 agents that have already been developed within their organization. So you need to start sort of like having a look at that pillar as well in order to project your sort of like AI future within that. But let's make sure that we've got the governance, and we also want to make sure the threat protection, because we're introducing a new threat vector into your organization by those AI agents that are being introduced within there. We need to understand, what are your controls? What are you going to do to govern things? How are you going to secure that environment as these things expand and sort of like the those non-human identities extend into the organization? So let's have a look at sort of like a user lifecycle workflow here before I hand over to Matt. And you can think about this both as the human identities and sort of like those non-human identities, being able to treat them in exactly the same way, being able to sort of like go through a joiner, mover, leaver process, again, whether they're a human identity or a non-human identity, and being able to make sure that they've got the correct security controls at the correct time. But what we can do here is that sort of like with sort of everything that we've got within the Entra Suite capabilities, which I'll be coming on in a moment, is what we can do is we can automatically, through your HR system, add those identities into your Entra ID ecosystem. We can make sure that the department and the job roles, their manager, and any other attributes that it is that they might require can be added automatically into their Entra identity as they're joined within there. And these are automatically created within the system. Those attributes, we can then have triggers. So 7 days before the employee comes to join the organization, that could automatically ship a laptop out to them. It could create an ITSM ticket within sort of like your help desk environment. The user credentials could be created, but maybe they're disabled because you don't want them to be enabled until they actually join the organization. You can add them to various groups, birthright assignments, depending on the department that it is. And sort of like you can then have a look at the personas within your organization and automatically give them all of those assignments. You can assign licenses to them and making sure that they've only got the licenses that they need at the time that they need them. When they come to join the organization, the account gets enabled. You can send a temporary access password to the user or to the manager of the user. You can use verified ID, which is where we use facial recognition to prove that the person is the person who's at the other end of the phone, and they aren't sort of like pretending or spoofing, or they aren't sort of like just shouting down the phone at the help desk to prove who they say they are. We can onboard the device using autopilot, so automatically go through that process and sort of like using Windows Hello for Business and sort of like authenticating through. Within Microsoft now, we don't even use passwords. We sort of like their passwords haven't been reset for many years, and sort of like we now use pass keys to enable sort of like our authentication onto the systems there. We can get all the applications that are just for the users and the users that they need, and all of those those roles and those permissions all automatically assigned. So you're automatically providing least privilege to each of those users as they join the organization. If a user needs any additional access on top of those birthright assignments, they can request access to that. Their manager can approve those ones. You could use facial recognition to prove the person is who they say that they are, to go through that process, and everything is audited within that. So if you need to, you can understand why someone requested access to a particular resource, who approved that one, and the justifications and the reason why. That also isn't just applications and roles and permissions. That can also be network access, where we can control who has access to what on the internet and who has access to what on your private access on your VPN, as granular as going down to an IP address and a port level. So you can control what a user has access through to your network on a unique level, which means each user only has access to what it is that they're implicitly given access through to on their environments on their inside and on the internet as well. If someone changes roles, their permissions are revoked. Get all of those new permissions that it is that they need for those new role. Again, this is triggered via your HR system. So if I change roles within HR, move from legal to marketing, for example, again, this will automatically revoke all of those permissions, give me new permissions within there. And then we're sort of like only allowed access to what I should have access to in the role that I'm given. Eventually, I leave the organization, I lose all my permissions, my account gets disabled, and then we don't have those inactive users, which are a high risk within the organization. And then eventually, 90 days later on, sort of like the user can be fully deleted from the system. And then we've sort of like got our end-to-end life cycle of sort of like a user within the organization there. So introducing the Entra suite, and sort of like Matt's going to spend some more time now going into exactly what all of these things look like. But private access, this is where we've got a user-centric VPN, where a user, based on the identity, who they are, what department they're in, what they should have permissions into the environment, they only have access to those resources internally. And again, down to the granular level of an IP address and a specific port into that environment. So where a traditional VPN, you've got an access to the entire network, what we're doing is we're only giving access to each individual user what they should have and need. Internet access, where we're controlling what a user has access through to on the internet, where you could have access to a specific Dropbox. So you don't have access to Dropbox in general, you just give the corporate Dropbox access, for example. And again, that could be to a particular group of users or just to the organization as well. So you can have really granular controls to what your users have access through to on the internet, protecting you from those malicious websites, but also giving you the granular controls that you need beyond that. Identity governance, this is the core, as Gillian was saying before, of everything within this one, where we're controlling the joiner, mover, leaver process and what the user has access through to. What does a user still need access to that, being able to do those access reviews as well within there. Identity protection is where we use sort of like a risk-based profile to understand sort of like if a user's risk score changes, we can automatically then change the permissions that that user has on a network role-based with inside your environment. And finally, verified ID. This is probably sort of like top of sort of like the interest at the moment. This is where we can use facial recognition to prove that somebody is who they say they are, whether they're logging onto the help desk or whether they're sort of like requesting access, or they're joining the organisation, and being able to mitigate those social engineering risks that we've heard throughout the year. So again, just sort of like reconfirming what Gillian was saying before, we're able to sort of like give that least privilege access using the identity governance and the other capabilities within the suite. We improve user experience. I've got some awesome statistics from some organizations that have rolled this out, reducing their number of help desk tickets down from 600 down to 6 within their organization, reducing their on-premise footprint of that on-premise hardware, proxy servers, hardware servers, firewalls, etc., and being able to leverage conditional access for any on-premise applications. So you can then sort of like put those multi-factor controls through to any on-premise application. As long as it's got a TCP or a UDP port, we can now put those controls in place. So great to be able to be here today, and handing over to Matt for the rest of the session, but thanks again.
I'm going to jump in before we go to Matt, if nobody minds. But thank you very much, John. One thing I think I've been realizing quite recently is that a lot of the things that we're doing at the minute are complicated, right? There's a lot of processes, there's a lot of stakeholder management, there's a lot of explanation and justification that needs to go on across a business as to why should we implement these tools, why should we prioritize identity versus other areas. We know that there's ongoing struggles and the usual arm wrestle between budget for this or budget for that. Like how do we make sure that we get this really to the top of the agenda? And Matt and I have done a lot of talking and a lot of pontification about this. And one of the things that we're saying is, right, like, let's really just boil it down to what are the questions that we are asking within our businesses. And it's come down to 3 things, we think. So it's who, what, and how. Who is in your ecosystem? Who is engaging with what? who is part of your ecosystem, what do they actually need to achieve? Do they have the right permissions? Do the permissions change as they move through the organization? But fundamentally, who? Then you can start looking at, okay, privileged access management, extensions into other areas. How do they interact with you? So some of the stuff that John was talking about in terms of internet access, private access, some of the other areas of Entra Suite. Ultimately, it all boils down to who. And if you can solidify around that, then you're on a really, really good path to success. And that's why we're saying start with identity governance. This is probably where you can see great incremental gains by making, by implementing the tooling. So for example, if we can get a really, really good handle on our users, who is in our ecosystem, like we said, we can then make sure that we're extrapolating that out to contractors, to B2B relationships, to external partners. And we know that that's really difficult. We know that that's complicated, and managing it effectively is not easy. We can then look at systems and applications. We can see, okay, what's on-prem, what's cloud first, how can we have repeatable patterns and processes? This is all baked into the IGA engine. We want to make sure that we've got a stronger security position. We want to make sure that we're remaining compliant, and we want to make sure that we're operationally efficient. So these are all things that we want to prioritize, but that can sometimes often come at the expense of security, or as like we said before, you've got this arm wrestle between what can we finance, what can we not finance, where do we have to make the compromises? And really what we're seeing is if we can prioritize identity governance, you can actually move the needle pretty far, pretty fast, and you can ensure that you've got those real core fundamentals in there. Like we mentioned before, AI is only accelerating this. It's only driving the change faster. And as I said at the beginning of the call, I'm very lucky to work in the travel and hospitality space. But that's one of the key use cases that Google and others are broadcasting for agentic AI is how can you have a full life cycle of somebody booking a holiday. Now, for me right now, unless I know who that agent is that I'm interacting with on behalf of the company, and that the agent that's working on behalf of me has the delegated authority to perform the tasks that I want it to, I'm not making any bookings. I am not releasing credit card information, and I am not going to complete on that transaction. So we need to make sure that we're balancing that pace of change, those really, really good use cases, those massive operational gains that we can have, but maintaining that security and maintaining the control and visibility about what's going on. So it's really, really important that we decide on our starting point. And from there, we start building out a really, really robust process. So Matt, over to you now. And like we said before, this is based on real world discussions, real world current projects that we are involved in, right? And this is what we are seeing is our recommended approach. Now, of course, at the end of the webinar, we can talk about, how do we get in touch? But like I say, this is what we are suggesting for clients to do. So over to you, Matt, for your infinite wisdom.
Infinite, yeah, okay.
Infinite.
So when looking at all of the technology stack with customers, there's a huge amount of functionality that comes with a single license. Governance, cool, you get all of this stuff. And now with Suite, it's like, there's even more. So what we've been doing is trying to approach things less from a technology perspective and more of a business process perspective. What are the actual tangible outcomes and the experiences you want for your users within the system? And we have some key generic, unbranded building blocks that can be used to build castles or spaceships or identity systems that are then repeatable throughout a business. So when you do something that is broad strokes and has applicability over a broad user base, as you uncover more and more scenarios, you can use those same patterns and those same generic colored blocks to piece together scenarios for more niche instances. So we'll start off with number one, which is how on earth do you get your identities into the system in the first place? And John mentioned our connectors, or Microsoft's connectors, into Entra and on-premises from an HR system. On this screen, this is a customer we've been doing stuff with where we're pulling information from SAP SuccessFactors, and we're getting information via their BTP system. So there's some out-of-the-box connectors for different HR systems, And Microsoft have very kindly given us a generic API connector as well. So no matter the system you're using, if it has an API, we can grab data and shove it into the Entra systems. As this has scaled, we've noticed a few, I mean, they're not issues, but they are issues. And this is Active Directory's been around a while, and it ain't going anywhere for a while. But because it's been growing arms and legs over the decades, often it's really, really full. And there is a reluctance in this cloud first, let's drive everything to be, you know, cloud first, can't think of a better phrase, to store all of this extra stuff in Active Directory. And an example for us, right, we've been working with a customer, they've got a huge amount of really good data in their HR system that will drive governance processes down the road. I think we ended up with like 40 extra attributes that would need to have been created in Active Directory, and there just isn't the space. We don't want to extend the schemas on there specifically for the purpose of then writing those attributes up to Entra. But with Entra Connect, once a user is connected to Entra, it can only be edited on premises. So our solution to this was, hey, let's write it to both places. Why don't we create all of these attributes that are only required in Entra for governance processes? We can extend the Entra schema, and the cloud will handle that absolutely fine. If the attributes aren't needed on-prem, let's not do that. So what we've ended up is with the split provisioning model, where we're creating users in both places and letting Entra Connect join them together. And even after they're joined, custom security attributes in Entra ID and application extension attributes can still be updated by the Entra model, and only the attributes that we actually require in AD get pushed down and then synchronized back up. And what this means is, as we transition to a more cloud-first model, when source of authority switching for users and user write back and stuff, all this stuff that we know is going to be coming soon, turns on, we just start to lift and shift functionality to the different API. And it's a really nice, easy migration because the underlying blueprint is already there. Now, as we were doing things, we did find certain limitations in process functions. A good example is data retention. We had scenarios where in Germany, a user principal name couldn't be reused for 99 years, but in the UK, it was 18 years. And so in the middle, I'm not sure if my mouse shows up, but in the middle, there's this data platform element, which is a Condatis developed solution, which functions similarly to, if you're familiar with the metaverse from MIM. It's basically data storage that pulls in attributes from all sorts of different source systems to build a unified view of a user that can then provide a clean feed through to the Entra APIs. And this is great if you have more than one source for your users. Maybe you've got full-times, contractors, third parties, guests. This allows us to generate these unique attributes and process things to make sure that they're within their retention period long after accounts have been deleted in Active Directory, because we don't really want to hang on to that account for 99 years just to prove it's still there. So these enhancements that we're layering on top are there to kind of solve for very complex logic and systems that the current iteration of the inbound APIs can't handle. Either they can't see across connectors, or the logic functions aren't there because of the way that they function as just inbound data ingestion, push things down. So with this, I do have a caveat, and that is it only really works if your domain is not federated with ADFS. It needs cloud auth. Now, I would strongly suggest that there is no, I'll say it, there's no real reason why your Office 365 domain should be federated with ADFS in this day and age. The migration path to defederate is simple. Have a look at stage defederation. It's almost seamless to switch back and forth. And by lifting and shifting your authentications to a legacy on-prem system, you're actually removing a lot of the benefits that you can get through identity protection and conditional access and the continual access evaluation stuff. So yeah, please, if anyone has a really good reason why they can't defederate, I would love to have that in the chat, because it's a conversation I love to have, and we can have a discussion offline. I will say this does not mean you have to get rid of ADFS in its entirety. Like if you go, oh, but Matt, we've got 200 applications and it's fine, keep it for the other ones. Let them migrate slowly. But moving Office 365 or M365 to cloud native auth, you'll have password write back, password hash sync. Everything will already be there probably in the background, so the switchover, the users probably won't even notice it, especially if you've got kind of seamless single sign-on already configured in the system. And then once that's done, you can take advantage of all of these new things that we're driving forward with the cloud first model. Because our eventual goal, right, is to reduce our on-prem footprint, reduce the amount of servers we've got, reduce the amount of legacy attack surface we've got, and ADFS stands in the way of that. Rant over. Building block 2, and I see we have a question about this in the chat for applications. Microsoft has a huge gallery. We're talking thousands of applications out of the box that you can configure in a few clicks to integrate with Entra. And then you can drive access to these applications using protocols like SCIM to provision and deprovision accounts, enable, disable, assign different permissions. A lot of this is dependent on what the applications support. But if there isn't something out the box and that application has an API, chances are we as a partner can build an integration that works with Entra to bring it onto the journey. And if it's a legacy on-prem system, for those who embrace the on-prem old school mentalities with MIM, there are ways of being able to take custom connectors used for MIM and your on-prem database things and actually run them from the cloud as well. So there's lots of options, both for new SaaS and legacy models, to bring your bring your applications into the Entra ecosystem and have that controlled by the governance models. So how do we control access? I can hear the cries from all your muted microphones. But Matt, tell us. Underpinning all of the Entra governance access controls really is access packages. And this is a catalog of resources. You can have multiple catalogs. And these could be SaaS applications, groups, teams, SharePoint sites, as your roles, lots of fun stuff. And then you can create packages of resources pulled from that catalog and assign them to specific user cohorts. The assignments can be manual. They can be self-service. Someone can go and request. And you can also have guest, like you share a link, basically. You say, okay, these people, I want them to manage their own access to this access package. Say it's a external third party with a service desk and they've got a lot of churn and you don't mind, like you're not bothered about who they are because they churn so much. You just know that people from this company access your service desk. And so you can say, here's the link, onboard your users, but it's only valid for 30 days, 60 days, a month, 6 months, whatever. So then if they do have a lot of churn, at the end of that time, access is automatically revoked unless they say, I need to extend my access. So it's a good way of being able to automatically deprovision guest access in specific scenarios. Tied into all of this is an access package, access review, I should say, engine, and an approval engine. So you can step through at each point and say, should this person still have access? Or when people request it, a tiered model to say, yes, they are, they aren't. And there are also separation of duty models in this to say these specific high privileged things can't be assigned at the same time. And this kind of limits your lateral movement, it limits your attack service so that you're encouraging people strongly to only do like a specific admin task at the same time or at once. Now, a lot of legacy applications that you might want to include in an access package are controlled by groups. So you've got some Kerberos application somewhere, and if I'm a member of this Active Directory group, I get access to this application. We want to control that through a cloud governance model. But right now, there's no nice, simple, well, I'm spoiling myself. There was not an easy, simple way of saying, I just want to include this on-prem group in here, because that's not the way the sync worked. You know, the Entra Connect would take the on-prem membership and synchronize it up. And yes, there was group write back, but that would create a brand new group on-prem, and you'd have to reconfigure your applications. Very annoying. No longer. Very chuffed with this feature. Oh, and apparently I've got an animation on there. To drive this cloud-first model, we can now switch the source of authority for groups so that they are controlled Entra first and written back to Active Directory. Now, on the face of this might not sound like a big change, but the critical thing is the group maintains its existing unique identifiers, security IDs, and position in the Active Directory. All that changes is that Entra Connect says, I'm not managing this anymore, and governance goes, I am. So you could take they do have to be universal security groups, change the source of authority, say you're using it to assign access to licenses or an application or something, and you could make that dynamic. And all of a sudden, your legacy on-prem group that's been there for decades is now smart and cloud-enabled and is functioning without anyone from the service desk having to update the membership. You can then also add that into access packages and have that be part of the wider governance control plane. And this has been a huge time saver, because instead of having to rely on application teams to check how it's configured and work out the updates and stuff, if the group already exists in the format that is working, this is a seamless transition to have it still work, and the application can migrate and update itself a little bit later. It really accelerates the adoption of the governance framework, which has been a massive boon. John touched on this with the user lifecycle, our fourth building block, lifecycle workflows. These are a trigger-based, well, it's a trigger-based workflow engine. And we can drive this with our absolutely 100% accurate data that we get through from HR, because of course it's 100% accurate. What this does is allow us to take business processes and apply the tasks that would occur in your business process automatically. Not necessarily, I mean, it does do a lot of technical stuff, but it's more the experience of things of how are we communicating? How are we generating a password and sending it out to the right person so that they can log on day one? How can we customize our welcome emails so that on day one they know where they're going and what they're doing? So these basic out-of-the-box tasks, you can just kind of plug and play, and you can have them kick off based on attribute changes, group membership changes, or time, like X number of days before or after hire or leave date. The big lead here that is somewhat buried until I press the next button is in this box here, the custom task, custom extension workflows. I think I've got that right. Custom task extensions, that's the one. And these break out into logic apps. So I don't think I've ever come across a business process that was like simple. And so what this allows us to do is break out to, again, any system that has an API. If you've got a service desk that's running that does certain things, or a device team that needs to receive certain things. Like, you can use this to provision devices or assign things from inventory. There's loads of fun stuff you can do. And what these allow is, say your current business process is this person does these things manually in a ServiceNow or a Jira ticket or something like that. You can now have the system take over that, but still maintain the audit records in those external systems by updating, creating tickets, doing that kind of stuff, which is very nice. And it keeps the experience of the service desk people familiar, so that they can go back and run through their audits and find out what happened if something goes wrong, without them having to learn a complete new system from day one. Other things that have been quite fun to include, because I am a massive nerd, the joiner process. Initial password communication is always a problem. By pulling information from our HR system, we can get verified personal details, like an email address and a phone number, and we can use one of these custom logic apps, one of these workflows, to pre-register that account for MFA. So before the user's even enabled, before the account is even turned on in the system, they are protected with multi-factor. And there's onboarding modules and things where you can make sure that the data is verified and correct. And there's loops in there where you can say, if we don't receive this, not only do we not register you, but we don't communicate your password with anyone externally. Because this allows you to actually send the password out with reduced concern that it can be used for nefarious means, because an account is already protected. Also, using this as part of our lever workflows, you can pull device information out and maybe trigger Intune wipes on Android for Work containers or Autopilot laptops. You can automatically reset them. You can also maybe integrate with an asset management system and say, hey, you're leaving, please return device 1, 2, and 3, because we know you've got them, and people don't have to manually go and make those emails or make those requests. Yeah, I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to carry on. And okay, yeah, this is a screen of lots of logos, and Gillian is our champion of travel and hospitality. This is a map of all the things within the industry that can be connected to and can be part of an ecosystem. And every single one of these has an API, and so has the potential to be integrated into business process somehow. How that happens, I'll touch on that in another slide, but it's possible. So building block 5, everyone, I really hope everyone on the call has heard of conditional access. So I won't labor it too much. But the goal of all of this is to bring as much into the world of conditional access as possible. As many signals as we can get allow us to do controls and enforcement based on the decisions that those signals give us. And this is, again, not to harp on about it, but why not having ADFS is important, because by having it in place, you're removing a lot of the signals that could be used to inform decisions. We're driving towards a continuous access evaluation model, not just a one-time thing. Let's revoke tokens if risk scores go too high. Let's cut sessions if X, Y, and Z happens. Let's build these rules in to protect people and, well, protect identities in a dynamic way that doesn't impact day to day. It's not a noticeable thing to someone. As far as they're concerned, they're just doing their job until something goes wrong. And that's when they can contact someone, because other than that, they don't want to have to be clicking lots of buttons and going to lots of different places and portals and things. I just want to do the thing, right? So layering on some extra stuff now, some secret sauce, except it's generally available, so it's not so secret. Verified ID is a fantastic way of providing extra protection to specific use cases. They can be layered onto access packages. So if someone requests an access package, they have to go through an additional verified ID check with a face check to say, is this you? This is great for protecting highly sensitive applications or resources, so that you can kind of double check that it is that person who's making the request to do the scary thing on the really important server. This is also really, really good for help desk scenarios. Gillian mentioned this at the top, of verifying not only the identity of the person who is ringing the help desk or emailing the help desk to ask for a password reset or a change of MFA details or something, but also to verify that help desk agent. It needs to be two ways. So, not to say that there was a specific attack in the news somewhat recently that this would have solved, but there was. If someone calls up your help desk and says, oh no, I need my password resetting, oh, can you do that? And they go, yeah, sure, it's reset for you. And then that person goes, oh, but to make sure it's clean, could you just reset my MFA stuff as well? Because I've got a new phone and this is, and they go, yeah, sure. Maybe they're a bit more aggressive than that on the phone, but the end result is password and MFA have both been reset. And now I've taken over that account. Job done. If verified ID had been put in place, that attack would not have been successful. And this is not a long deployment process. We're not talking months and months and months. This is like a couple of weeks. Chunk, 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 done, verified. Highly sensitive stuff. You must go through this process. Job done. Immediate protection for some of those social engineering type attacks. And finally, number 7 is the zero trust network access. And I remember when app proxy came out and the concept of being able to publish the MIM password reset portal to external users so people could reset their passwords when they were outside of the network blew my mind. And now it's not just on-prem web apps. It's as John said, basically anything with a TCP or UDP port. So you've got an SSH managed switch in a cupboard down there, wrap it into conditional access. You've got a IDP to a domain controller, wrap it up in conditional access. But it's not just that, right? You can say this person has access to this RDP or on this specific server. If they remote desktop to that server, they then can't remote desktop to the one next to it because they've only been given permissions to the one. So it stops that traffic hopping as well. And rather than a VPN where you just say, I've got access to the whole network, cool, I can do what I need. You're really limiting that kind of the zero trust model, the principle of least privilege, and saying, I really want to punch a hole just for this person, just to this resource for this amount of time. And so where we've had a lot of interest in this is to really highly sensitive resources, very specific use cases. But you can also do this for broader strokes, right? If you've got a finance database somewhere that a fat client app relies on, you can use this to tunnel that traffic through so that people can work securely remotely and still access these systems and these applications. And from a user perspective, it's not that nothing changes, things get better. Now I can just double click the application on my desktop. I don't have to find a VPN and do an RSA token, do this and that. I can just work quicker, saving time, saving money, being more efficient, which I love. Like the fact that you can now protect SMB file shares with Entra conditional access, I just think is fantastic. So we've got a pop quiz now, or at least I hope we have a pop quiz now, just to check if everyone's still awake. Of all of these building blocks, which one's your favorite? Which one interests you the most? Which one would you love me to build more content on to share with you? And we'll give it, because the feedback we get from this will directly drive the fun toys that I get to play with to then share the scenarios and with you guys. So it's always appreciated. Oh, wow, look at that, responses. Thank you, guys. I was expecting a tumbleweed gift to turn up, so that's fantastic.
Verified ID out in front.
That's a good one.
Very
Wow.
cool.
Yeah. Okay. I'm aware we're running out of time, so one more slide from me, and then I think we might have a couple of minutes to answer a couple of questions, maybe. How do we start? How do we deploy this? All right. I mentioned at the beginning that we tackle this from not a technology standpoint, but a business process standpoint, and that's kind of it. We want to find out what the final experience is for people using the system. So we do a lot of discovery, we do a lot of planning, we do a lot of prep work, because actually most of this is, it's kind of 70% analysis and 30% doing, because the technology, once you get your hands on it, is relatively simple. It's working out how you want them to interact. So that can be the complicated part. So we work with organizations both to upskill and to train and to apply and find those broad strokes that can apply to, kind of 70-80% of users. Do we tackle licenses? Do we tackle initial password sets? Do we tackle removal of guest users first? Do we tackle verified help desk first? All of these can be done one at a time, in parallel, in any order, depending on what the business requirements are and what will have the most impact to your results, with the least impact to your users having a bad day. And so that's how we try to tackle it. We want to do as much as we can to drive impact while upskilling and allowing people to take on the system, because there's nothing worse than having people come in and do loads of stuff and then they leave and you're like, well, what's this? We can't ever touch it now because it might break. And that's the beauty of this, is that it's very familiar. Entra Azure, there's lots of skills in the market. People are very familiar with it. And having these interacting building blocks makes it very easy to go, oh, well, we did this here. Let's redo that for this bit here. And with that, I'll be quiet and pass back to Gillian. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. So you're so clever, Matt. Like we really do this all day, every day, don't we? Right. But I think what's really beneficial here, and what I like, is this, as I say, as we said at the beginning, this all comes back to who, what, and how. And all of the different building blocks that Matt has just gone through, and what John was talking about in terms of the Microsoft tooling, if we can distill around those three questions, I really do believe that we'll be able to make really tangible, impactful gains for our clients, and making sure that we're not adding complexity, we're consolidating systems, we're making sure that there is a smooth path for implementation. And like Matt said, we'll work with you to figure out, okay, what's on fire, what's not, what do we need to do first, what's the long-term goal, and really make it digestible and something that can be maintained going forward. So how to get started? Get in touch. Matt, myself, John, we're all here to help. There's no obligation, there's no such thing as a silly question. Trust me, I ask a billion of them every day to Matt normally. So I think it's really important. Scan the QR codes, book some time with us, learn more about Entra ID Governance, either on our website or on the Microsoft website. Also have a look at past webinars. We did do a webinar series about verified ID particularly. I see that there's also a question in the chat specifically about an agentic user. So Matt, maybe you want to have a quick look at that, or John, and see if we've got an answer for that before we wrap up. But yeah, I know that this can feel big, I know it can feel scary, and I know that it also feels like there are so many different parts of the business that need to be involved. And they do, but one of our big skill sets and one of our big learnings from a lot of the implementation is, how do we create something that is applicable, something that can be communicated across the business, and actually something that we can, bring people along for the journey, to make sure that we are applying the zero trust principles. We're getting a really strong security position, but we are not disrupting people in their day-to-day. We are making things better, and we're actually consolidating and making something more simple to manage. So we've seen a lot of siloed teams that are dealing with different component parts of this. We'll help you navigate that. We'll make sure that we're doing things in a sequential order to get you the best result, but again, not making it harder for anyone on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so John has answered the question about agentic users, which is pretty cool. So again, we can provide a further session on that if that's something of interest, and I would imagine it will be for a lot of people, as this is obviously growing on a daily basis. So it's pretty cool. On that note, we will wrap up, I think. Ali, I don't know if you want to come back in and just say thanks, but genuinely, thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to attend. We appreciate that, people are busy. This is a lot of information. We will share the recording. We will also share the slides. We'll make sure that everyone's got the access to the information, and please reach out to either Condatis directly or your Microsoft account managers and keep the conversation going, because we can only get better if we start putting this in place, right?
Yeah, I think you perfectly closed it there, Gillian. So once again, thanks everyone for attending. As Gillian said, we'll share everything, all the resources after this call. Please have a good rest of your day, and hopefully looking forward to speaking soon.
Go get a cup of tea. Have a good afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Bye.